Imagine a courtroom so silent that you could hear the sound of a heartbeat. Then, one question breaks the air. A question so sharp it freezes everyone in their seats. Judge Aileen Cannon looks straight at Jasmine Crockett and asks what no one else dared to say. In that single moment, the tension turns electric, respect collides with conviction, and truth stands naked before power. What happened next didn't just shake the room. It reminded the world that justice isn't about who wins the argument, but who dares to face the truth. Ladies and gentlemen, what unfolded in that courtroom today wasn't just another legal exchange. It was a clash of intellect, confidence, and conviction. When Judge Aileen Cannon turned her gaze toward Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett, the air in the room grew still. Everyone expected a typical back and forth. But what came next wasn't typical at all. It was sharp, deliberate, and layered with meaning. Judge Cannon's question didn't just test Crockett's stance. It tested the very foundation of how truth and accountability operate in today's divided landscape. The power of a question often lies not in its complexity, but in its precision. When Judge Aileen Cannon leaned forward and asked Jasmine Crockett that piercing question, the entire room seemed to pause. It wasn't loud or theatrical. It was quiet, deliberate, and deeply unsettling in its truth. If accountability only applies to one side, can it still be called justice? In that one sentence, she managed to distill what so many debates, investigations, and hearings often fail to reach: the essence of fairness itself. A question like that doesn't just challenge a person's position. It shakes the very structure of their reasoning. It forces introspection, the kind that reveals whether our principles are truly rooted in balance or merely disguised as righteousness. What made Judge Cannon's question so powerful wasn't that it was aimed at Jasmine Crockett. It was that it could have been aimed at anyone. It wasn't partisan, it wasn't emotional, it was philosophical. It invited every person in the room, and every listener beyond it, to ask themselves whether their idea of justice has been compromised by bias. True justice, by definition, is blind. It cannot be selective, cannot bend to politics, and cannot serve convenience. But in the modern age of division, where loyalty often overshadows logic, that question felt like a challenge to the entire system. It exposed the uncomfortable truth that many people only champion accountability when it benefits their side. When the same standard is applied in reverse, suddenly the principles change, the tone shifts, and the definition of justice becomes fluid. Judge Cannon's delivery made all the difference. There was no aggression, no performance, just clarity. It was the kind of tone that reminded everyone that the courtroom is sacred ground for truth, not a stage for political theatrics. And in that moment, Jasmine Crockett, a woman known for her eloquence and unyielding confidence, was caught in the gravity of the moment. The pause that followed was more telling than any rebuttal could have been. It wasn't a silence of defeat, but of recognition. She knew, as did everyone else, that this question was bigger than her position. It was about the integrity of justice itself. The beauty of a question like that is how it transcends context. It forces reflection beyond the immediate issue. It doesn't matter which party you belong to or what your ideology is. That question applies universally. If accountability becomes a weapon rather than a principle, justice loses its moral foundation. Judge Cannon's inquiry brought that uncomfortable reality to light. It made people realize that selective morality isn't morality at all, it's manipulation. And yet, it wasn't accusatory. It was almost Socratic, meant to provoke thought, not to humiliate. That's what made the moment so impactful. It turned a courtroom exchange into a lesson in ethics. There's a reason that great leaders, thinkers, and teachers have relied on the power of questions throughout history. A question challenges ego. It humbles the confident and empowers the silent. It opens the door for dialogue, not dominance. Judge Cannon's question was crafted in that same spirit. She didn't argue. She didn't lecture. She simply asked something so precise that it cut through all the noise. It reminded everyone that justice cannot exist in a vacuum. It must be universal or it ceases to be just at all. It was the kind of question that lingers long after it's asked, because it lives in the conscience of those who hear it. As the silence stretched across the room, even the audience, journalists, aides, spectators, felt its weight. The air seemed thicker, charged with introspection. People weren't looking for who would win the exchange anymore. They were looking inward. That's the real power of a question. It doesn't need to be answered immediately to have meaning. Sometimes the silence that follows is the loudest answer of all. Jasmine Crockett eventually responded with poise and grace, but even in her response, there was acknowledgement that the question had merit. She understood that the judge wasn't just confronting her. She was confronting a growing culture of selective outrage that has infected both sides of the political spectrum, and that's what separates powerful questioning from performative confrontation. In an age where debates have become shouting matches and truth is often treated as subjective, the simplicity of one well-timed question can restore the balance. It can remind people of what the conversation is supposed to be about. Not who wins, but what's right. Judge Cannon didn't just speak to Jasmine Crockett that day, she spoke to the conscience of the country. Her words echoed far beyond the courtroom walls, into households, newsrooms, and social media feeds. Everyone who heard that question had to wrestle with it privately. And that's how real change begins. Not through lectures, but through self-examination. The moment also highlighted the importance of courage in questioning. It takes strength to ask something that may not be popular, something that cuts across political comfort zones. But truth has never been comfortable. It's not supposed to be. Judge Cannon's question reminded everyone that the pursuit of justice demands that we risk being uncomfortable, that we hold ourselves to the same standards we demand of others. Without that, justice becomes performance. All image, no substance. And in that sense, her question wasn't just directed at one Congresswoman, it was directed at an entire generation of leaders, commentators, and citizens who've forgotten that accountability doesn't come with exceptions. By the end of that exchange, no one in the room was quite the same. The silence that followed wasn't about awkwardness, it was about reflection. People realized that the question wasn't just relevant. It was necessary. It stripped away the layers of rhetoric and exposed something raw and human, our need to believe that fairness still matters. That's the power of a question like the one Judge Cannon asked. It doesn't fade when the cameras stop rolling. It stays with you, echoing quietly every time you're tempted to apply a double standard. It makes you pause before judging others and reminds you that justice, if it is to mean anything at all, must always be impartial. So, when we talk about that courtroom moment, that instant when the world seemed to stop for a heartbeat, it wasn't because of a dramatic outburst or a political statement. It was because one woman, sitting behind a bench of authority, used the simplest and most powerful tool in human discourse, a question. And that question, stripped of all theatrics and agendas, forced everyone, including those watching from afar, to remember what true justice is supposed to look like. That's not just the power of a question, that's the power of truth itself. Jasmine Crockett's composure in that moment was a masterclass in restraint, intellect, and dignity. When Judge Aileen Cannon posed her piercing question, most people in that courtroom expected a fiery exchange. They anticipated that Crockett, known for her passionate and unapologetic nature, would come back with a verbal counterpunch. But instead, what unfolded was something entirely different. She didn't respond with heat, she responded with grace. Her stillness, her measured breathing, and the steady gaze she held spoke volumes before she even uttered a word. It was the kind of silence that communicates strength, not surrender. In that still moment, Jasmine Crockett showed that real power isn't always about volume. Sometimes, it's about control. The strength of her character became evident in how she handled the weight of the judge's challenge. Many in that position might have grown defensive, feeling cornered or attacked. But Crockett didn't flinch. She understood the gravity of the question, the weight it carried, and the eyes that were upon her. There's a rare type of confidence that comes from knowing exactly who you are and what you stand for. And she embodied that. Her pause wasn't hesitation, it was intention. It was the sign of a leader processing, not reacting. In an age where most public figures rush to defend their pride at the first sign of criticism, her restraint was revolutionary. It reminded everyone watching that maturity in leadership means responding with wisdom, not impulse. When Jasmine finally began to speak, her voice carried the kind of calm authority that commands attention without demanding it. She didn't raise her tone, nor did she resort to grandstanding. She acknowledged the depth of the question and responded with thoughtfulness. She spoke of how justice cannot be seen as a tool of convenience, how those who stand for truth must be willing to apply it equally, even when it's uncomfortable. Her response was not defensive, it was reflective. She didn't just defend her position, she elevated the entire conversation. That's what made her reaction so powerful. She turned what could have been a moment of tension into a moment of clarity. Her ability to maintain composure in that high-stakes environment also spoke volumes about her emotional intelligence. Great leaders know that influence isn't built on dominance. It's built on control, especially self-control. When she chose calm over confrontation, Crockett demonstrated a kind of mastery that's rare in political and legal arenas. It wasn't weakness, it was wisdom. She understood that anger can make noise, but composure makes impact. People remember how you carry yourself under pressure, not just what you say. And in that instant, her demeanor communicated more than any speech could, that strength can be graceful, and conviction can coexist with humility. There's also something profoundly human about how she handled that silence before answering. In that pause, you could almost see the thoughts running through her mind. Not fear, but calculation. She was weighing the meaning of the question, choosing her words carefully, and ensuring that her response aligned with her values. That's what separates a reaction from a response. Reactions come from emotion, responses come from purpose. Crockett's ability to choose purpose in the face of provocation was a testament to her discipline and integrity. And that integrity resonated beyond the courtroom. It was an example of how leaders should handle adversity with patience, intelligence, and a steady sense of self. Her composure also reflected an understanding of the larger picture. Jasmine Crockett knew that the moment wasn't just about her. It was about the principles she represented. Every camera in that room was recording, every viewer was forming an opinion, and every word she spoke would echo far beyond the four walls of that courtroom. She knew that losing her cool wouldn't just undermine her argument, it would overshadow it. So, she held her ground not just as a politician or advocate, but as a symbol of calm in chaos. In that sense, her composure wasn't just personal. It was strategic. It allowed her message to be heard clearly, untainted by emotion or distraction. Another layer of her strength lay in her respect. Despite being challenged in a way that could have easily been interpreted as confrontational, she never disrespected the bench. She didn't roll her eyes, interrupt, or deflect. Instead, she listened, truly listened, before responding. That act alone, in today's climate of constant talking over one another, was powerful. It showed humility without submission and confidence without arrogance. It proved that respect for dialogue doesn't mean surrendering your convictions. It means engaging with integrity. And through that engagement, she reminded everyone watching that professionalism still has a place in public discourse. The more she spoke, the more her words carried a quiet force. There was a steadiness in her tone that made people stop and think, rather than react. That's the hallmark of influence. When your words don't just fill the air, they fill the mind. Her ability to shift the energy of the room without raising her voice was remarkable. She didn't need to win through dominance, she won through depth. And as her response concluded, even those who disagreed with her couldn't help but respect the poise with which she carried herself. What Jasmine Crockett demonstrated in that exchange is something the world desperately needs to see more of: grace under fire. It's easy to stay composed when everything goes your way. It's extraordinary to stay composed when you're under pressure, being questioned, and the stakes are sky high. She showed that dignity doesn't mean silence, and courage doesn't always roar. Sometimes, it speaks calmly and lets the truth do the heavy lifting. Her demeanor turned what could have been a volatile moment into a memorable one, not because of theatrics, but because of depth. When history looks back on moments like this, it won't remember every word that was said, but it will remember how it felt. People will recall the calm strength of Jasmine Crockett, standing her ground with respect and conviction. They'll remember that in a room full of tension, she was the calm in the storm. And that's what real leadership looks like. Not the ability to outshout your critics, but to outthink them. Not to dominate the conversation, but to elevate it. Jasmine Crockett proved that day that true composure isn't about suppressing emotion. It's about mastering it. And that mastery, that quiet resilience, is what left an indelible mark long after the gavel fell and the courtroom fell silent once again. The exchange between Judge Aileen Cannon and Jasmine Crockett was far more than a simple courtroom confrontation. It was a profound clash of principles, not personalities. Too often in modern discourse, debates devolve into spectacles of ego, where each side seeks not truth, but victory. Yet what unfolded in that room was different. Here were two women, each intelligent, experienced, and fiercely committed to their roles, standing as representatives of two vital forces in society: justice and accountability. They weren't fighting for personal validation, they were embodying two sides of a greater truth. The moment became a rare glimpse into how disagreement, when rooted in integrity, can illuminate rather than divide. Judge Cannon's role in this exchange carried the weight of law and order. The measured precision of a judicial mind seeking clarity, not confrontation. Her question wasn't delivered as an attack, but as a philosophical challenge, meant to test the consistency of Crockett's convictions. It's easy to assume that such a question came from opposition, but it came instead from responsibility, the duty of a judge to probe deeply into the implications of justice. She wanted to understand whether fairness was being applied universally or selectively, and that required courage. Asking a question that confronts bias is never easy, especially in a world where truth is often seen through the distorted lens of politics. On the other side stood Jasmine Crockett, a woman whose voice has become synonymous with fearlessness and advocacy for equity. She represents not the sterile walls of legal formality, but the pulse of the people, the voice of conscience in a system that can often feel detached from emotion. Yet when she faced Judge Cannon's challenge, it wasn't fire meeting fire. It was conviction meeting clarity. That's what made the moment powerful. There was no shouting, no spectacle, no need for dominance. It was a calm exchange where both women reflected a deep understanding of their duty, one to the law, the other to the people, and yet, they found themselves meeting on the same ground of truth. This interaction was a demonstration of how disagreement doesn't have to mean division. In that room, what we saw wasn't conflict, it was contrast. Judge Cannon spoke from the perspective of a system built on rules, while Jasmine Crockett spoke from a reality shaped by lived experience and the fight for fairness. Their perspectives were different, but both were valid. The tension between them wasn't destructive, it was productive. It revealed how justice and advocacy must coexist to create true accountability. One without the other becomes either too rigid or too reactive. And that balance, as rare as it is, was visible in the way these two women conducted themselves that day. Their dialogue reminded everyone that integrity isn't proven when people agree with you. It's proven when you can stand firm and respectful in the face of disagreement. Neither Judge Cannon nor Jasmine Crockett tried to dominate the narrative. They listened. They responded. They challenged ideas without diminishing each other's worth. That's the hallmark of true professionalism. Understanding that you can contest someone's beliefs without compromising your own ethics. This is what separates maturity from ego, leadership from arrogance. The exchange wasn't about who was right. It was about making sure that what is right is seen clearly, even when filtered through different perspectives. The beauty of that moment also lay in how it transcended gender, politics, and power dynamics. Too often, powerful women in public roles are framed as competitors rather than thinkers. But that's not what happened here. What the audience witnessed was mutual respect, even in opposition. Judge Cannon's question came from a place of intellectual integrity, and Jasmine Crockett's answer came from emotional intelligence. One represented order, the other, empathy. And when those two forces met, something remarkable happened. The room didn't erupt into chaos. It fell silent. That silence wasn't tension, it was reverence. People understood that they were witnessing a kind of dialogue that has become almost extinct in today's polarized climate. one based on thought, not theatrics. This clash of principles also highlighted the need for balance in public discourse. Too often, justice is seen as something that belongs only to courts, while empathy is viewed as something that belongs only to activism. But what if, as that exchange showed, both are essential? Justice without empathy becomes cold and mechanical, while empathy without justice becomes chaotic and inconsistent. What Judge Cannon and Jasmine Crockett demonstrated, even unintentionally, is that real progress happens when structure meets compassion, when law meets heart. It's that delicate interplay that sustains any democracy. And that moment was a living example of it. Even the audience, which entered expecting confrontation, found themselves reflecting on something deeper. They weren't witnessing a win or a loss. They were witnessing dialogue, and in that dialogue, a reminder that truth doesn't belong to any one side. The greatest lesson that came from that moment is that opposing perspectives don't always have to destroy each other. Sometimes, they refine each other. Judge Cannon's sharp inquiry forced Jasmine Crockett to clarify her position with precision, while Crockett's thoughtful response reminded the court that justice cannot thrive without understanding. Both women, in their own ways, elevated the discussion, not for the cameras, but for the principle of fairness itself. And perhaps the most striking thing about that moment was the tone. No raised voices, no interruptions. Just presence, two people fully engaged in the pursuit of truth. It was an unspoken reminder that strength doesn't require hostility, and that intellect doesn't need arrogance to be effective. That's why this moment resonated so deeply. It showed what discourse should look like: challenging, honest, and grounded in respect. In a time when shouting matches often replace substance, this interaction stood as a reminder that civility and conviction are not enemies. They are allies. By the end of that exchange, it became clear that neither woman had truly won or lost. What they achieved instead was something far more meaningful: understanding. The power of that dialogue wasn't in its outcome, but in its example. It taught everyone watching that integrity doesn't crumble under questioning, and conviction doesn't require aggression to stand strong. Judge Aileen Cannon and Jasmine Crockett may have come from different worlds, but in that brief, unforgettable encounter, they met on the same sacred ground: the pursuit of justice through truth. And that, more than anything, is what left the room speechless. The exchange between Judge Aileen Cannon and Jasmine Crockett carried a message that reached far beyond the walls of that courtroom. It was a lesson for the public, a reminder of what accountability truly means in a society that often confuses opinion with truth. In that silent, tense room, as one powerful question lingered in the air, the audience, both those present and those watching from afar, were given a mirror to reflect upon themselves. The moment wasn't just about law or politics, it was about us. How we interpret fairness, how we judge others, and how we hold ourselves to standards that we so easily demand from the world. The judge's question and Crockett's composed response formed a conversation that transcended the individuals involved. It became a lesson in moral responsibility, in how justice, truth, and democracy all depend on the courage to face uncomfortable questions. For the public, this exchange was a wake-up call. We live in an age where people often rush to take sides before understanding the facts, where accountability is demanded selectively, and where outrage is easier than introspection. Judge Cannon's question: if accountability only applies to one side, can it still be called justice? Wasn't just meant for the Congresswoman. It was meant for everyone listening. It cut through the noise of politics and reached into the conscience of society. The question forced people to confront their own biases. Are we truly seeking fairness, or are we simply protecting our preferred narratives? Too many times, people champion justice only when it suits their beliefs. But justice, by its very nature, cannot be conditional. It must be consistent, even when it challenges what we hold dear. The lesson here is that accountability is not a weapon. It's a mirror. It reflects who we are when no one is watching. Judge Cannon's words reminded the public that the integrity of a system is only as strong as the integrity of the people within it. And Jasmine Crockett's response reminded us that standing for justice is not about popularity, it's about principle. Her willingness to face the question head-on, to engage rather than evade, demonstrated that real leaders do not fear scrutiny. They understand that true progress comes not from silence, but from dialogue. Her poise and conviction showed the public that disagreement doesn't have to breed division. It can build understanding when rooted in respect. For many watching, the exchange was also a reflection of how much we've lost in our national conversations. In an era where shouting is mistaken for strength and volume for victory, the sight of two powerful women engaging in respectful confrontation felt like a return to something real. Substance. There was no need for insults, no theatrics, no scripted sound bites. It was pure conviction meeting pure inquiry. And that's the kind of discourse society needs to see more of. The public learned that dialogue doesn't have to be destructive. It can be the very force that refines truth, sharpens understanding, and strengthens democracy. The public's reaction, silence, reflection, awe, revealed something profound. Deep down, people crave honesty. They are tired of seeing justice used as a political prop and truth treated like a matter of convenience. This moment between Cannon and Crockett reintroduced something sacred into the conversation: accountability, with dignity. The kind of accountability that doesn't humiliate, but elevates. The kind that demands better from all of us. Not just leaders, but citizens. Because at its core, justice is not sustained by laws alone, it is sustained by the character of the people who believe in it. And in that room, character was on full display. This exchange also served as a reminder that democracy itself relies on our collective willingness to face difficult truths. It's easy to demand fairness from others, but much harder to apply it to ourselves. Judge Cannon's question pierced that hypocrisy. She asked a question that didn't just expose a political inconsistency, it exposed a cultural one. Too often, we measure justice based on who benefits from it. But justice, in its truest form, doesn't choose sides, it chooses what's right. And Jasmine Crockett, through her calm and reasoned reply, reinforced that principle. She reminded everyone that accountability is not the enemy of progress. It's the foundation of it. Beyond the courtroom, this moment resonated in homes, schools, and workplaces. It invited people to pause and reflect on how they define fairness in their own lives. Do we hold ourselves accountable with the same rigor we expect from others? Do we listen to understand, or just to respond? The lesson was clear. If we want a society that is truly just, we must first be willing to be honest with ourselves. Justice doesn't begin in courts. It begins in character. It begins in the small moments where we choose truth over comfort, empathy over ego, and integrity over image. The beauty of this exchange was that it stripped away all the noise and revealed something universal. That justice is not a political tool, but a moral compass. It reminded the public that no one, regardless of their position or belief, is above accountability. Whether you are a judge, a congresswoman, or an ordinary citizen, fairness must be applied equally. Anything less is hypocrisy. And that's what made this moment so unforgettable. It wasn't about who won the exchange, it was about what the exchange taught everyone watching. By the end of it all, when the gavel struck and the tension dissolved, the lesson hung in the air like a quiet truth too powerful to ignore. Justice is not sustained by power, but by principle. Accountability isn't meant to punish. It's meant to protect. And progress doesn't come from silencing each other. It comes from questioning ourselves. Judge Cannon and Jasmine Crockett, in that moment of confrontation, reminded us all that fairness isn't something we inherit, it's something we practice. It's built every time we choose truth over bias, humility over pride, and courage over comfort. The public may have walked away speechless that day, but deep down, they walked away wiser. Because the greatest lesson from that moment wasn't about law or politics. It was about humanity. It taught us that justice isn't just a system, it's a standard. And if we all learned to hold ourselves to that same standard, perhaps the world would finally start to look a little more like the ideal we all claim to believe in. As the courtroom emptied, the echoes of that single question lingered. Can justice exist without balance? It's the kind of question that doesn't just challenge a person, but an entire system. Whether you're in politics, law, or everyday life, that moment between Judge Aileen Cannon and Jasmine Crockett was a mirror held up to us all. It asked us to reflect on how we define fairness, courage, and truth. Because sometimes, it only takes one question, asked at the right time, in the right tone, to leave a room full of powerful people completely speechless.